Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Emma.
And I'm Leon.
And we are the co-hosts for Wharton Tech Talks. Today, we are joined by Kit Cutler. Kit is the Director of Procurement and Strategic Partnerships at Zoox and has been at the company since 2017. Prior to Zoox, Kit worked in global supply chains at Apple. Kit also received his MBA from Wharton, before which he worked in finance on Latin America and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay. Kit, we're really excited to have you here on the podcast. Where are you dialing in today?
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Leon. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you. I'm sitting in one of our office buildings in Foster City, California, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you. For those unfamiliar with Zoox's mission, do you mind giving us a brief overview?
Sure. So the official mission statement is that Zoox is transforming mobility as a service by developing a fully autonomous, purpose-built fleet designed for AI to drive and humans to enjoy. And what that means in English is that it's essentially a robotaxi that you will hail like an Uber or a Lyft. It will drive itself to you when you summon it with an app, a Zoox app that you'll have on your phone. And it will drive itself to you, pick you up, and take you where you want to go in a way that is safer than an Uber. It is cleaner in that all of our fleet is electric. It is going to be a lot nicer than riding in the back seat of someone's dirty Toyota Prius. And most likely, can't promise, but at least will be cost competitive, if not cheaper.
That sounds like an ideal way to get around. What's the current stage that Zoox is at, and what are the major barriers to expansion going forward?
Right now, we are in test mode. We have a series of videos actually on our YouTube site called Putting Zoox to the Test, where you can see the various tests that we impose on our hardware platform, which is our vehicle or robot, as well as the software that drives it. And these tests are getting to a really advanced stage. I can't say when we will launch, but it's closer than you think. And your second question was the impediments. I think that the main impediment is really achieving that level of safety to the point where, I will feel comfortable putting my 3-year-old son in it, and you will feel comfortable trusting us to ride in it. I think that we will get there. In a way, we're charting a course for a new industry. It's a little bit like the first time, if you think about like flying in an airplane, 30,000 feet in a steel tube, that's scary, but they've invested a lot of time and resources to ensure that actually flying 30,000 feet in the air in a steel tube is safer than walking on the streets of Philadelphia or driving your car. And that's similar level of investment that we're making in ensuring that riding with a Zoox vehicle is similarly safe.
Okay, we're really curious about your role as the Director of Procurement and Strategic Partnerships. Could you briefly describe the role that sourcing has at Zoox and generally the process, how it works?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that appealed to me about Zoox, even when I was talking with Zoox while working at Apple, was the key role that our organization plays. My boss, who's our Vice President of Supply Chain Quality and Reliability, reports directly to our CEO and always has. I think that kind of shows we're not part of some other P&L. We're not reporting up through the finance department like at other companies. We have a seat at the table at the executive level because what Zoox is doing is really difficult. We are writing software to make cars drive themselves, which is one of the hardest AI challenges that exists today. And we are planning to operate a business directly to consumers, which is a big undertaking. And we're building our own vehicle platform. And what the supply chain organization does is, and our organization is officially called Procurement and Strategic Partnerships, because we negotiate partnerships with the companies that are going to enable us to be successful in our mission. My specific role is negotiating the partnerships with our supply chain partners who are helping us to build our vehicle. Because what we're trying to do is so difficult, we didn't really want to be vertically integrated in the way that, like, for example, Tesla has tried to do. Rather than learn to build vehicles from scratch here in Northern California, we wanted to leverage the expertise that we knew already exists in the automotive supply chain and go to those major tier one automotive suppliers who currently have Volkswagen and General Motors and Ford as their customers and talk with them and get them to help us to build our vehicle, to build this novel platform and come along for the ride with us as they have been since 2017. So, I mean, my second week at work, I went to the Detroit Auto Show, the first time I'd ever been to that, and started meeting with some really well-known automotive suppliers and pitching them on Zoox in a way that's sort of similar to like business development, and telling our story and hopefully getting them inspired in the mission and also to get them to place a strategic bet on Zoox. I think especially in 2017, it was far from clear that electric vehicles were going to be commonplace, and it was even less clear that autonomous electric vehicles would succeed. So we had to sort of persuade these big players like, the top automotive suppliers like the Bosches of the world or ZFs of the world or NVIDIA, that it was worth taking a chance on us, that there was at least a good possibility that we could succeed, and that if they didn't work with us, they would run the risk of missing the boat. And we've been successful in getting them to believe in us. I think their confidence in us has paid off as Amazon decided that they believed in our mission enough to acquire us in August 2020. And like the field is starting to narrow to the point where those companies that bet on Zoox in 2017 are starting to see that we are going to actually make it to market and succeed, we believe, and be one of the very few players remaining in this space.
What's the most challenging part of this process? Is it like figuring out what components you need, or is it, as you said, making the pitch to these suppliers or something else?
Yeah, it has a few challenges, but they're really interesting, fun challenges, I would say. Very few parts of our vehicle exist exactly as we want them in the market today. An example I give all the time is that our vehicle has airbags, but our airbags are not like traditional car airbags. Car airbags pop out of a steering wheel or pop out of the instrument panel. We don't have a steering wheel or an instrument panel. So we have to talk to airbag suppliers who have that expertise, but get them on board to help us design a new kind of airbag that separates the passengers who are facing forward from the passengers who are facing rearward and kind of deploys from the center headliner of our vehicle. So that takes a lot of effort from those airbag suppliers. And if those engineers, those airbag engineers, weren't working with us to invent a new kind of airbag for autonomous vehicles, well, maybe they would be working on the next Volkswagen Tiguan, which is going to sell a gazillion in the near term. Economically, it's in those airbag suppliers' interests to just work on the next RAV4, work on the next F-150. Why would you tie up your engineer's time working with an unknown California company that doesn't have any products on the market today? So trying to persuade them to give us some of those engineering resources on the promise that one day we're going to change their industry. That's, I would say, the hardest part. And as the timelines have extended, making sure that we keep those strategic partnerships fresh and vibrant so that at least at an executive, like a C-level at our supplier partners, that they continue to believe in the mission and that they continue to allocate those engineering resources to us rather than pull them away and give up on our mission.
I imagine the Amazon backing was a big stamp of approval when you go to these suppliers.
Yeah, it definitely did not hurt at all. I think that the Amazon acquisition really helped us to answer two questions that when I would pitch in 2017 to suppliers, I never had a great answer for. One of them was about the capital. Building each of our vehicles is expensive. Building thousands of them before you see your first dollar of revenue, which is what is needed if you're going to have a fleet of these in a city and have them be available within a few minutes after you summon it. Building thousands of these vehicles before you see your first dollar of revenue, incredibly expensive, not to mention the cost of building the factory, et cetera. So when companies would ask me, where are you going to get the money to do this? My answer was, we think we will find it. We're confident we'll find it. We didn't really know. But now with Amazon backing us, that answers that question quite convincingly. I think it's even more convincing than a traditional automaker. I mean, Amazon is 20 times as large by market capitalization as even the largest automaker. This is a capital intensive business, and having one of the largest companies in the world behind us is a force to be reckoned with. The second question it answers is, how do you reach the consumer who maybe already has an Uber app and a Lyft app on their phone? How do you get them to download the Zoox app? And I think that was always going to be a challenge, but you probably already have the Prime app or the Amazon app on your phone. And Amazon's one of the most trusted companies in the United States. There's companies that do surveys of what companies do you trust? And Amazon always ranks very near the top of those surveys. So we're certain that Amazon is going to help us to reach our customer base because they have a track record of success in that area.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched upon this a bit when you talked about like the backing Amazon gives you and the customer base. But I'm curious, specifically in sourcing and procurement, you previously worked on Apple. What differences did you see in the approaches in procurement that a large company like Apple did versus maybe Zoox in its earlier days?
Yeah, it's quite different. I could talk for a long time about this, but I will try to just summarize. The Apple scale and their presence in the market already gives them the ability to be quite demanding on its supply base to the point where they can dictate terms in many cases. And as someone who's working as a procurement professional, and really I would say a professional negotiator, what I found at Apple was that I was expected to be a little bit merciless in dealing with suppliers, that my job was to demand what Apple needed and to accept no compromises. Whereas at Zoox, we were an unknown quantity, and we are trying to cultivate relationships with companies that are much bigger than us and have been around in the market for 100 years or more. And so it forced me as a negotiator to develop more skills, basically. At Apple, I used what's called hard power, demanding what I wanted and banging the table, so to speak, to get it. Whereas at Zoox, I have to use soft power. I have to build my relationship over time with executives at our partner companies. And I have to use smart power, that is to look for win-win-win type deals. And we have to be willing to give up some things and concede things to have a healthy, balanced relationship with our supplier partners and decide which battles we're really going to fight. At Apple, I was basically not allowed to concede anything because Apple didn't need to concede anything. And at Zoox, I've always had, and my team has a lot more flexibility to negotiate creative deals that work for us and work for our supplier partners.
Yeah, super interesting. And when we think about Apple and its suppliers, we're aware a lot of these suppliers are overseas, and I imagine it's might be similar for Zoox. What's the role of geopolitics or the macroeconomic conditions in the work that you do?
So in terms of geopolitics, there are always hotspots. Right now, I would say the hotspot du jour of today is the relationship between the United States and China, and perhaps the relationship between China and Taiwan. And you have to be conscious of that and look for a backup, like think about what would I do in the worst case scenario and how would I get the components that I need or the support that I need in the event of an adverse thing happening in the world. But it doesn't take, if you cast your memory back, 1 year ago, the hotspot du jour was Ukraine and Russia. What am I buying that touches Russia? And how do I protect against the embargo that was building on Russia? And a few years ago, there was very high tensions between North Korea and South Korea, where, having factories in South Korea was viewed as a bit of a liability. And it wasn't that long ago that there was a series of tsunamis and floods in Southeast Asia and Japan, and having a sole source part in Japan or Thailand was considered very unwise. I don't know where the next geopolitical hotspot will be, but in general, I think it's incumbent upon us to keep abreast of current events and be thinking of backup plans, countermeasures to keep our supply chains flowing, even in negative contexts.
So to follow up on that, is it a lot of balancing, thinking ahead with only acting if something occurs? How much do you plan ahead versus just reacting, I guess is my question.
I think it's something that we do plan ahead, we talk about, but it's really hard to predict the future. We can be quasi proactive in the sense of when we begin to see a flare up in a particular area, there's things we can do like pulling ahead our demand and look for alternate sources nearby us. So I would say it is not entirely proactive because we don't have a crystal ball, but we try to be quickly reactive. And we try to have tools. Like, for example, one of the first things that I did at Zoox was to build a procurement database that has a geographical component to it. I can very quickly run a report on this database to know exactly where every part on our supply chain is built. And I think it's important to have those tools to set yourself up to react quickly. And part of having those tools is thinking in advance about the need for them.
That makes a lot of sense. We're seeing more and more nowadays firms being unaware of where their parts are coming from and unaware of what countries are touching what parts of the supply chain. So it sounds like an excellent tool. What are the changes Zoox might look to make with its procurement strategy as it scales?
Yeah, good question. It's something that we daydream about. I think that we're keenly aware that we have competitors who are racing to get to market just as we are. And we predict that when we go to market and start offering our service at scale, there's going to be pressure from other entrants in the market to reduce prices or to find ways to save money on our cost of goods sold, most of which comes from our bill of materials cost. So we're going to be looking as an organization within Procurement and Strategic Partnerships for how can I optimize the supply chain. And probably that will mean scaling up our organization to go deeper. I'm not saying that we're going to immediately scale up our team 10x, but by diving deeper into the supply chain, you can drive competition at more nodes of the supply chain and reduce what you pay at the end of the day. That's one key thing. But I also think that we're going to own this vehicle platform. And it's not going to be like Lyft and Uber, where the drivers don't really, you're going to get a Toyota Prius, most likely, whether you choose Uber or Lyft. And Uber or Lyft don't have control over their vehicle platform. So they can't really control the experience that you get riding in that vehicle, right? Whereas we will have absolute control. We don't have a driver who's like an independent contractor, and we build our own vehicles and design them. And so we're going to be able to turn dials and levers to improve the experience of getting from point A to point B. Just like you might pay a premium to ride in business class over economy, that we might be able to get some customers to prefer to ride in our vehicle over competitors by offering an improved experience. So I can imagine that as we mature, my team will be enabling those new features.
It does sound like negotiations, or you mentioned negotiations is a big part of your job. It sounds like as Zoox scales, you'll be moving from a position of no to little power to a position of power. Is that going to dramatically affect how you approach the negotiations?
I do think it affects it somewhat, yeah. For me, to use the technical term that I learned at Wharton, negotiations are all about the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, the BATNA. And by working harder and talking to more potential competitors, and by pitching ourselves better, we try to improve our BATNA, basically. And we can only do so much. As we kind of prove ourselves and earn the right to talk to better and more numerous suppliers, I expect that we will have a better and better BATNA, which means we will be able to get a better deal for Zoox and ultimately a better deal for our customers. It would be great to take what you pay right now in an Uber to get from University City, Philadelphia to Center City, and I can imagine cutting that by 80% at some point in the future. And if we're able to do that and still be profitable, it'll be through the efforts of our team by driving down the cost of building this vehicle so that we can pass along those savings to consumers.
Amazing. I was going to head home before this and looked at Uber and it was $30. So any cut to that for a less than 10-minute ride would be great. Speaking of Wharton and the MBA, we'd love to take a step back and ask you about how you got into procurement. Could you give us a little bit of the story, how you ended up in it, and how did the MBA shape it?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work, as you mentioned, for the World Bank immediately prior to Wharton, and in a number of international aid and development jobs like the Peace Corps or as a contractor for the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I went to Wharton because I thought I wanted to switch to private sector finance. Wharton is almost certainly the best place to go if you want to transition into finance. And I was very gung-ho into doing that. A funny anecdote was that my career advisor, my first year, asked everybody to fill out kind of a psychological personality questionnaire. And I remember filling it out and kind of dismissing it. It took a long time and it felt like it was a waste of my time. And I was confirmed that it was a waste of my time. The result it spat out after much computation was that it predicted that I should be a supply chain manager. And I told my career advisor, Mary Ellen Lamb, that this just proves how worthless these psychological questionnaires are because I'm here to be an investment banker and it thinks I want to be a supply chain manager. But I pressed on with my dream of being an investment banker. And in fact, I was co-president of the finance club. And I got my dream internship on Wall Street, working in Latin America, mergers and acquisitions. And unfortunately, by the end of that summer, which I thought was my dream internship, I realized that I hated investment banking as much as everyone told me I would. And I was a bit lost coming back to my second year, not sure what I wanted to be when I grew up at 30. And I took a step back and thought about, like, why did I want to be an investment banker? And what was it about that career that drew me? And I sort of cataloged it. I really liked that it was a global career. I have always enjoyed traveling and talking with people from different cultures and finding a way to find common ground with them and relate to them. I thought that investment banking was a portable skill set, something I could learn to do at one company, but it would open up a lot of other doors to other careers. I knew that investment banking there was a surefire path from being an individual contributor to leading people. And I also thought that working in finance is something that I would be proud of and that my parents would be proud of. I wasn't working in an area that was, at least in my mind, like I wasn't chopping down the rainforest for a living, So it was important to me to be kind of morally behind what I was doing. So when I opened up the aperture a bit, I realized there's a lot of jobs that would check those boxes and not just investment banking. And Apple was recruiting on campus that year in 2011 for an operations position. That's all they said. They didn't say procurement, they said operations. But I realized that I would be proud to work at Apple. I thought operations and manufacturing was a very portable skill set, and it was definitely a global career. And I threw my hat in the ring, and I was surprised that they agreed to interview me. And I was even more surprised when they gave me a second round interview in Cupertino, and shocked when they made me a job offer. They only specified at the time of offer that it was to work in procurement. And I was a little bit confused and didn't really even know too much about what was entailed. But I've come to realize that I already had a lot of the skills. I think that psychology survey turns out to be actually pretty accurate about me. I've always felt a sense of like righteous indignation when I felt somebody was ripping me off. I don't know if any of you feel that as well, but I feel it deeply in my heart. It burns. And having that sense of righteous indignation and unwillingness to accept it when you're getting something less than a good deal is, I think, a key skill set. And I think probably living in Philadelphia, the greater Philadelphia and New Jersey area cultivates that sense in people, that little bit of that edge. And that's what I've found to help me succeed since then.
Amazing. Yeah, I know that feeling. I lived in China for a year and spent a lot of time haggling. So just as good maybe as a Wharton class walking around the markets in China.
Exactly. Then you must know the feeling. I remember I went to buy a pair of sunglasses, and it was like a knockoff pair of sunglasses in China. And they told me it was $15. And I felt so good about myself when I negotiated it down to $6. And then I met one of my Chinese colleagues. She showed me the exact same pair of sunglasses, and she'd paid $1.
Yeah, you always know if they're saying yes to the deal, they're still making at least a decent margin on it.
Indeed.
So, what advice do you have for those interested in procurement? It's not something I'd thought of before, but after you've talked about it, it seems so interesting. And so, what concrete steps might people take?
Yeah, I think that's totally normal. In fact, if I ever meet somebody who went to Wharton to work in supply chain, I would be shocked. I never do. I certainly didn't. But I do think that Wharton provides a lot of the tools that allow people to be successful in this line of work. And I actually think that a lot of Wharton people say that they want to be a product manager, let's say, and what they really are looking to get out of that experience often has a lot in common with the job that we do. I think people want to enable technology, and have some control over the development of the product and maybe facilitate a dialogue between the experienced designers and the engineers and the finance department. And that's actually what our job offers here. Probably my number one tip is to take a negotiations class and learn a little bit about like the academic discipline of negotiations. I think that the two best business schools for the academic study of negotiations are Wharton and Harvard. There's really nowhere else that compares. So you're at one of the two best places in the world to study negotiations, whether it's from Richard Schell, or who wrote Bargaining for Advantage, a classic book in this genre, or whether it's from Cade Massey, who was my negotiations professor. I think now he teaches Influence, but it's similar, or any number of Wharton's other professors who are sort of apprentices in a way to those all-stars. So I encourage you to take advantage of that proximity to greatness in negotiations, but also in terms of working at a place like Zoox or maybe at Apple or wherever. The best way to get your foot in the door is to let us know that you're interested, whether it is joining the tech club or joining the future mobility club or joining one of the treks or just reaching out on LinkedIn. It's hard for us to look at people's resumes and know, this is someone who truly is passionate about doing this. I think it's helpful to give us some external signs that show us that this is something you really would be willing to pour your heart and soul into.
All right, now that we have the heavy stuff out of the way, we're going to move to the rapid answer questions. Kip, what was your first job?
So my first adult job, as a kid, I was a paper boy and like a math tutor and stuff. But my first adult job was actually as a telemarketer. I think most of those jobs have been outsourced now to other countries, but back in 1997, and after I graduated high school, I did some inbound telemarketing as a customer service rep for Bell South. And then they transitioned me to the outbound telemarketing, which was for I think it was a Psychic Friends network. Are you ready to have our psychics amaze and delight you?
That's great.
I didn't last too long in that. I went to college. So fortunately, I don't have to earn a living as a telemarketer anymore.
Right. What's a book you have read recently?
So I recently read and can recommend a book called When Women Lead, which is by my friend and college classmate, Julia Borston. I have some strong women leaders on my team at Zoox, and our CEO is a strong woman leader. And I thought I wanted to read it partly because my friend wrote this book, but also to help me kind of better understand where they're coming from and hopefully become a better leader myself.
Makes sense. Aside from telemarketing, if you were not in tech, what career would you have wanted?
So I really enjoyed working in international aid and development and helping people, helping alleviate poverty professionally. And I actually kind of think about at some point later in my career returning to that field. So I think that that's what I would be doing if I weren't in tech.
Makes sense. And now for our final question for you. What is a wild bet you have for the future of the self-driving car industry?
Yeah. So I actually think that my wild bet is what we think of as a car is going to evolve a lot. Right now, traditional cars are designed for the safety and comfort of one person, the driver. And the Zoox robot is kind of one take on how a vehicle could look if you design it for riders. But we're in early days, and not having to design for a driver opens up a lot of freedom. So I think that it's possible that one day we'll see vehicles designed for maybe one or two riders, or maybe another kind of vehicle that could be designed for long distance travel. It might include like a nap pod in it. And one kind of comical thing is that I remember talking to our first CEO, and he kind of tongue in cheek suggested that a future Zoox could offer a robot to parents whose newborn infants won't fall asleep unless you drive them around in a car. And so maybe some future Zoox will allow you to just drop your toddler or newborn into it and have it drive around the block for you to put it to sleep. Who knows? All these possibilities are opened up by the driverless revolution.
I could definitely use that. I fall asleep on trains and cars all the time. The possibilities are kind of endless if we tweak our thinking about what a car really is.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we have some exciting days ahead of us.
Amazing. Well, we've really loved talking to you, Kit, and learned a lot about the industry and hopefully inspired a few people to look again at those procurement jobs. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Emma and Leon. It was a pleasure.